First of all, thanks a lot really for inviting me back to this very well-known and important forum. And on that, day, exactly, on 8th of May. And I will try, I understand that everybody, expects from me to make, very clear numbers, how much we shall produce and so on, and how it will be done. I would like, first of all, really to use my few minutes, to look a little bit broader. What is really going on in the whole, world, in Europe, in Ukraine, and what is the responsibility of our generation, which is very much related really with the military things, but nevertheless, we need to see also a little bit of this, historical perspective. So definitely, I will not maybe go too much back into the history, but today is a Victory in Europe Day. Today we remember unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany 80 years ago, exactly on this day. And to me, this day is also about the heroism and suffering of Ukraine. Suffering because in the 20th century, Ukraine was a battlefield and killing ground for two monstrous totalitarian tyrannies, Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia. 8 to 10 million Ukrainians were killed or died during the Second World War, a quarter of population. Just 10 years after millions starved to death, killed by Stalin in the man-made famine of the Holodomor. And Victory in Europe Day is about the heroism of Ukraine, because millions of Ukrainians fought against the Nazis in allied armies as soldiers, as partisans, and helped to destroy a regime responsible for terror, murder, and genocide on a global scale. And that heroism we see still today in the streets and battlefields of Ukraine. Victory Day is about victory, and it is about peace. But 80 years ago, Cold War followed World War. An iron curtain fell across the continent. In the West, freedom, but constant military threat. In the East, Soviet occupation and communist dictatorship. One totalitarian tyranny replaced the other. As you know, I am from Lithuania. For me and for people in Ukraine, freedom came delayed, 45 years later. We got freedom only in 1990, in 1991. I was born in 1956. I can still say that I lived almost half of my life. It was exactly last year when I crossed this, mark. I lived half of my life under Russian occupation. And I still remember what it was like. Oppression and liberation. That is my personal experience. And I can say that I don't want that again for my children and grandchildren. And the future of my children and grandchildren, the future of Europe today depends on Ukraine. Because today, 2 years later, we still hear echoes of the past. Then, as now, the invader came like a bandit in the night. Then, as now, it started with bombs on Kyiv. Once again, an aggressor seeks to enslave Ukraine and dominate Europe. This time, it's Putin's Russia. Russia is fighting a war of aggression against Ukraine. And we know, as our intelligence services are saying, Russia could have enough weapons to test NATO Article 5 and attack one or more European Union countries during the next several years. That is why we need to remember that today, history and future of the history is made in Ukraine. The future of Ukraine, the future of Russia, the future of Europe, the future of our kids and grandkids is decided on the battlefields of Ukraine. But history is important not only for memories. History is also important for lessons. How not to repeat tragic mistakes of the history. Today I see the danger that we can repeat some of the most tragic mistakes from European history of the 20th century. And that is why I want to speak openly about that, because this is the only way how we can avoid them. The first mistake. lack of military support to Ukraine. During 3 years of the war, annually, both the European Union and the United States was giving military support of around 40 billion euros, more or less 20 billion on each side. But each side military support is less than 0.1% of their GDP. Both 0.1% of United States GDP, less than 0.1, and less than 0.1% of EU GDP. European Union is spending now in average 2%. United States spends 3.4% of GDP on their own defense. NATO is going to agree on 3.5% requirement, which is far more than we are giving to Ukraine. Why such a difference? Why do we think that today it is more important to take care only about our own defense capabilities, but not about sufficient Ukraine capabilities when Ukraine is defending us against the same enemy? I don't understand such a military logic or political logic. Maybe we can have a more balanced approach. We cannot repeat the mistake of middle of 1930s when the democratic West was not investing into the need to stop Hitler at the very beginning. Second mistake, inability to make a difference in between of aggressor and the victim, at least by somebody. Let's remember Ronald Reagan, who was saying, don't be afraid to see what you see. We need not to be afraid to see that Russia is an aggressor and Ukraine is a victim. And to answer the question, with whom we are standing. For me, for us, the answer is clear. But it looks that for somebody still it takes time to understand. Third possible mistake, the promise to have good relations with aggressor Putin. The big mistake, in my view, is to declare the strategic interest to establish good relations with aggressor Putin after peace will be established. NATO and all of us, we consider Russia the biggest threat to European security, and NATO plan to radically ramp up preparedness to defend and to deter Russian aggression. It is impossible to plan to be friendly with the biggest threat and to demand bigger defense spending in order to deter the biggest threat. Implementation of the promises of friendship with aggressor Putin will embolden Putin to continue his internal and external aggressive policies, will bring confusion to the whole Western world of democracies, and again will encourage aggressiveness by other authoritarian regimes. The fourth mistake, recognition of occupation of Crimea. History teaches clear lessons about the leadership. In the critical moments, leaders can play the role of Chamberlain or role of Churchill, Roosevelt, or Reagan. Chamberlain was expecting that he can agree with Hitler in Munich 1938 on peace and friendship, and demanded that Czechoslovakia would give part of its territory, Sudetenland, to Hitler. That was, as we remember, the beginning of the road to Second World War. Churchill, Roosevelt, and Reagan were fighting for freedom and against evil empires, and they succeeded. To demand that Ukraine would give part of its territory to aggressor Putin is simple and tragic repetition of the historic mistake of Chamberlain. And fifth mistake, support to the formula no NATO for Ukraine. Russia demands no NATO for Ukraine not because they are afraid of NATO offense against Russia using territory of Ukraine, but because they are afraid that NATO will defend Ukraine against next Russia aggression. Support to formula no NATO for Ukraine makes Russia planning of next aggression against Ukraine more easy. And here I want to use this occasion also to say a few words about Russia, about tragedy of Russia and about the future of Russia. Russia's war against Ukraine is a global tragedy. Russia's war against Ukraine creates an incredible number of tragedies for Ukraine. The war again raises memories about the tragic history of the European continent in the 20th century. Can we avoid another pan-European tragic war, similar to First World War or Second World War? But paradoxically, this war waged by Putin is also a tragedy for the Russian nation. With this war, Russia excluded itself from the global community of normal, non-aggressive countries. The trajectory of Russia's development slowly is going down, and will continue to follow such a direction if there will be no domestic political will for dramatic change back to normality. It is clear that it will not happen with Putin in power. The history of humanity is full of examples how nations, famous in the history, or civilizations were not able to change the downward trajectory of their development, and simply they disappeared from the future of history. The historic roots of the tragedy of Russia are very clear. During the Second World War, Russians, together with Ukrainians, Belarusians, Americans, Brits, and many other nations, all together managed to defeat fascism of Nazi Germany, but later Russians, without a real fight, lost the battle against their own internal, we can call some sort of national fascism, mixture of nostalgic Russian imperialism and autocratic Bolshevism. In the 21st century, on the European continent, everybody wants to have good relations with their neighbors, including good relations with Russia. The Baltics have the strongest interest in that because of our historic experience. But good relations depend only on one condition. Is Russia able to become a normal country? You cannot have good relations with an aggressor, especially if you are living in its neighborhood or on the European continent, not separated from aggressive Russia by Atlantic Ocean. That is why everybody in democratic Europe needs to make a clear decision. What they want. Good relations with Putin, knowing that it will just prolong tragedy of Russia and threats to Europe, or good relations with normal Russia of the future, which maybe will manage to come back if Russian people will be helped to understand what are the alternative directions of Russia's future development. Downward with global isolation and imperial aggression, supported by autocratic Bolshevism of Putin, or possibility of normal Russia without aggression and autocracy, but with re-established global relations, including with the European Union. If we agree that aggressive Russia was, is, and will stay as the biggest threat for European security, which will not disappear even if the peace will be established, there is a need for democratic West to have a clear strategy what to do with such a permanent threat. It is not enough just to strengthen Ukraine's or European Union's defense capabilities against aggressive Russia. It is paramount importance for the European Union to have a long-term strategy how to assist Russia to become a non-aggressive normal neighbor of the European Union. This is how permanent threats to Europe will disappear. Our support to creation of success of Ukraine is the single most important strategic tool in such a strategy towards Russia, since Ukraine's success can inspire Russian people to follow this example. Putin is afraid of such an inspiration and of the possible dreams of Russian people to have a normal life. Putin is himself a tragedy for the future of Russia, and his regime is not so permanent as it looks at the moment. The European Union needs to have a strategy how to help Russian people to have a different, not so tragic future for themselves. That would be also the biggest benefit for the security of the whole Europe. Today, when we have such a historical gathering, we need to talk not only about urgency and the strategic defense needs of today, but also about the longer-term future of Europe. In my view, we face two different timeframes with different security challenges. The first challenge, most urgent, Russia's aggression against Ukraine and the possibility of Russian aggression against EU and NATO member states before 2030. The second challenge is for the longer term, the next decade. China's rising military power, and as a result, the United States shifting its attention more and more to the Indo-Pacific, at the same time diminishing their presence on the European continent. As the white paper on the future of European defense says, a new international order will be formed in the second half of this decade and beyond. And that is why we need to act based on our long-term strategy, because history will not forgive us for inaction. Defending Europe is an European task. Those are the words of my mission letter. Today, quite often, myself and various Europeans were repeating the self-evident truth that 450 million Europeans should not ask 340 million Americans to permanently defend us against 140 million Russians who are not able to defeat 38 million Ukrainians. Economically, we are strong and powerful enough to take our defense into our hands. but it will take time. Looking into the longer-term future, it will not be enough to spend more on defense and to produce more defense weapons. In order to defend ourselves, it is essential that we develop an European security architecture, as stated in my mission letter. Our strategic goal is to unite all efforts to strengthen European defense into a true European defense union. Ukraine today is playing a crucial role in the urgent defense of Europe, and it will play a most important role in the longer-term development of European defense readiness, in development of new European security architecture, in the process of building a true European defense union. That is why we need to understand the strategic significance of our long-term strategy on Ukraine. And our Ukrainian strategy is based on three pillars of integration. First, security integration. European security formula is very simple. Europe whole, free and at peace. Freedom needs to be defended and expanding more and more towards the eastern part of European continent. Formula for peace, peace through strength, can be implemented only with us giving additional substantial strength to Ukraine. That can be achieved with increased defense assistance to Ukraine. And as Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is repeating, the best security guarantee for Ukraine is porcupine strategy, strengthening Ukrainian defense and military capabilities to the level of real deterrence. As Commission President repeats, our best investment into security of Europe is our investment into security of Ukraine. The new European Union program, Rearm Europe, and safe loans are creating possibilities for European Union member states to increase military support to Ukraine through joint procurement of weapons together with Ukraine, from Ukraine and for Ukraine. And we're establishing the joint European Union-Ukraine Task Force for exploitation of safe loans, and such a new arrangement will be very helpful. And I am really hopeful that with that instrument we can make a big change in our support for defense capabilities of Ukraine. Second, it's defense integration. Integration of European and Ukrainian defense industries is becoming a very important part of our agenda. New opportunities are opening with forthcoming European defense industry program. On forthcoming Monday, very important European Union-Ukrainian Defense Industries Forum will be held in Brussels. Ukrainian defense industry is showing unbelievable successes. We can support Ukrainian defense industry with our financial and industrial strengths, but Ukrainian defense industry can support European defense industry with Ukrainian know-how, remarkable skills of innovation and modernization. Warfare doctrinal integration also can help us to understand the significance of Ukrainian drone army in order for us to be able to repeat that on our side. New initiatives of our integration in this field also are coming. And the last, European integration. It is symbolic that today we remember 8th of May, the end of war. Tomorrow we shall remember 9th of May, the beginning of European unity. European integration proposed by Schuman Declaration on 9th of May in 1950s had a very clear goal: to protect peace and avoid wars on the European continent through unification of Europe. As Commission President said yesterday, Ukrainian accession to the European Union can be the strongest guarantee. That is why Ukrainian membership in the EU is needed not only for Ukraine, but also for the whole European Union. That is why, as Commission President also have said, we are working hard with Ukraine to open all negotiation clusters in 2025. And the best way to finish is again to quote Commission President. Ukraine joining our Union is the greatest guarantee of a just and lasting peace. In our history, peace and European integration have always gone hand in hand. So let us bring Ukraine inside of our Union. Let us walk the path of peace together. This is the most important responsibility of our generation. Slava Ukraini!